question is, where do the ducks go when the lake gets all icy and frozen over? Do they get picked by somebody who takes them to a zoo? Or do they just fly away and then come back? Where to go? Let's go and find out. You know that I love phraseology. Phraseology is the study in linguistics that deals with like multi-word units that tend to occur in a fixed order, like collocations, like idioms, like phrasal verbs. This video is going to be about idioms and phrasal verbs that I've learned by reading The Catcher in the Rye. To be more specific, I've picked 4 idioms and 1 phrasal verb. I also very much like to consolidate my knowledge when it comes to the conditional sentences in English, because they are very tricky, or can be very tricky, and that's why I've picked instances for those as well. And I have also found out that this book is full of defining relative clauses, possibly because we are dealing with an adolescent narrator, so to speak, right? New York again! Всем привет! Hallo, zusammen! Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of my new series, Learning English by Reading Books in English. And in today's episode we are going to be talking about this American masterpiece, The Catcher in the Rye by J.D.Salinger. And the first question is, of course, who is catching whom? Why in the rye and not in the wheat or in the corn? I mean, I've got a ton of questions that we are going to be answering. By the way, I've put on my red hunting hat just to be closer to this 16-year-old protagonist, Holden Caulfield, who buys such a hat in New York for just $1. And he puts it on and takes it off throughout the novel until the moment he gives it to his sister Phoebe, who is so crazy about weird looking hats, and she likes it. So it's called earlaps. Let me demonstrate it to you. How versatile it is. Looks like this. So you know what's been in my mind? Holden, he puts it with the peak to the back when he feels like it. Then he turns it around with the peak to the front and to the back again, right? So this is called a peak, a new word for me, peak, as opposed to beak. Nice minimal pair, right? So I'm going to leave it on to get Holden Caulfield's vibes, because he is so rebellious. He thinks that he's surrounded by phonies, which is a nice word, I think. So phony, right, in terms of word formation. By the way, I've been counting this word as I was reading this novel, and I've got this word mentioned 48 times, which is a lot, isn't it? In this novel, Holden calls himself yellow, and then also says that he is feeling blue. Another question is, why does Holden get the axe? Holden Caulfield gets the axe, or he was given the axe, meaning he gets expelled from school because he fails in 4 subjects except for English, because what it says, he does not apply himself. And here we've got a very nice reflexive verb that I didn't know prior to reading this novel. I mean, you can apply for a job, like for a position, but when you apply yourself, then you make an effort, you make a commitment, you work hard to achieve your goals. There is a very strong hint at the end of the novel that Holden Caulfield is going to apply himself at a different prep school. So prep schools are college preparatory boarding schools that have exceptionally well qualified faculties whose goal is to help the children of the wealthy gain admission to prestigious universities like those in the Ivy League and eventually take their place in the country's upper class. I mean, those Ivy League institutions are mentioned in this novel, right? Like Yale, like Princeton, like Columbia University. And Holden's father wants Holden to go to either Yale or Princeton and to potentially become a lawyer, right? Another question is, why does Holden screw up yet again at Pensive? As you've probably guessed, to screw something up or to screw up, so it can either be used as a transitive verb, meaning it can take a direct object like Holden screws 4 subjects up at a Pensive prep, or as an intransitive verb, meaning we don't need a direct object. He screws up at Princeton, meaning he spoils his time there, he makes a fatal mistake or makes a couple of fatal mistakes and is kicked out of this prestigious educational institution. Even though Holden says that he's surrounded almost exclusively by crooks, by phonies, by slobs, he strikes up a number of conversations in this novel because he is a social being like any of us, right? And you know, just for the sake of it, because he loves actually talking to people, even though at one place he says he'd rather pretend being a deaf mute and not having to talk and have those silly, useless conversations for the rest of his life. But you know, he's an impulsive human being. By the way, this simple past of strike is struck, so it says we sort of struck up a conversation, meaning he starts a conversation. An alley is a path in a park, and on both sides we've got bushes or trees, but to be up his alley, meaning to be the type of thing that you love doing, you're interested in doing, right? And when he goes to see Mr. Spencer, his history teacher, who says that Holden had already flunked out of Ilkton Hills, if I'm not mistaken, Holden says it wasn't up his alley at all, he wouldn't have understood it anyway, and so he sort of comes up with an excuse in order to, as quickly as possible, leave Mr. Spencer's house, because he says, I couldn't hang around there any longer. One phrasal verb that I've picked by reading this book, that I had actually come across by reading To Kill a Mockingbird, is to barge in on. It's a phrasal prepositional verb, isn't it? So we've got this lexical verb barge, we've got the adverb in and the preposition on. Barge in on. And so, for example, a couple of instances in the novel. So I'm going to speak from my memory because I haven't put them down here. So when he sneaks in his parents' apartment in New York, he keeps saying, I was afraid my parents would barge in on me, yeah, meaning come in all of a sudden, unexpectedly, right? Also in Pensive Prep, there is this guy, Robert Ackley, actually sounds very much like Eklig in German. Perhaps there is a connection, I don't know, but he's got a lot of pimples, so he's pimply, to use Holden's words, and he used to barge in on Holden, right? So Holden would not invite him to come and see him, and he would just do it because he's got this habit to barge in on Holden, right? One interesting word that I've picked is flob. he says that Akli is a slob, like in his personal habits, because he supposedly never brushes his teeth. They look yellow and rotten and not pleasing to look at, right? Then he says Phoebe was no slob, meaning she was very tidy and neat. She would put her clothes on the back of the chair, right, and her shoes right underneath. If you are snotty, then you've got a lot of snot in your nose, and sometimes this snot is starting to come out, which is really not a pleasant experience to look at, but it's like this mucus that is coming out, and sometimes we sound bunked up, right, because we've got a lot of snot in our nose, right, and so we can describe that person as snotty, right. Another meaning of snotty, right, is cheeky, unfriendly, and he says that Phoebe can be very snotty, like she would cut him off and would reply very, like in a snotty way, he says, because she is got it that he's failed again, and she's very worried that daddy will kill him, right? You've probably made dough yourself with your bare hands to like bake something, right? But dough also means money, right? For example, he was running low on dough, or Phoebe gives him her Christmas dough, or this guy who used to go to fancy prep, he is doing a lot of dough because he started this undertaking, like a business or something, like so. This is like very common in this novel. So first conditional, when Holden's roommate asks Holden to write a composition for him in English, it has to be something descriptive. He says, don't knock yourself out, write something descriptive, right? So he says, are you gonna write that composition for me? I need to know now. And he says, if I get the time, I will. If I don't, I won't, right? So we've got this present tense, if I get the time, and then I will, right? If I don't get the time, I won't, right? Second conditional, he's invited Sally Hayes, who is very attracted to Holden, but who does think that she's attractive, but he'd rather be together with Jane Gallagher. Anyway, they go to this show, and he, I think, starts laughing very loudly, and he says, if I ever sat behind myself in a movie, I'd probably lean over and tell myself to please shut up, right? So we've got this simple past in the if clause, if I ever sat behind myself in a movie, and then in the main clause we've got I'd probably lean over, right? So I would lean over and tell myself to please shut up. And the third conditional, when he meets those two nuns that go around collecting dough, quote, with those beat up old straw baskets, he thinks that their conversation was nice, but it would have been better if they hadn't been anxious to find out whether he's a Catholic or not. Right, so it wouldn't have spoiled the conversation if they had, but it would have been different probably, right? So if they had asked whether he's a Catholic or not, it would not have spoiled the conversation, but it would have been different probably. Also, you know what I've noticed in this novel? That the third conditional is used so often. I haven't been counting the instances because I would have run out of space, I think. But, and you know why? Because the third conditional is obviously denoting the unreal past very often. And so he's talking about his regrets, something he regrets to have done in the past, or something he regrets to not have done in the past. So, for example, he regrets, I think, at one place, the fact that he gave Sally a call, or that he didn't give a call Jane Gallagher. I wouldn't have read it out loud to him if he'd written it. I really wouldn't, right? So in one word, we've got would not have. Oh my gosh, I love it. I wouldn't have. I would not have. I would not have read it out loud to him if he'd written it. I really wouldn't. A couple of instances to demonstrate the defining relative clauses. So we've got a lot of non-defining relative clauses in The Great Gatsby, and we've got a lot of defining relative clauses in The Catcher in the Rye. It was named after this guy Ossenberger that went to Pensy, right? So we don't know who this guy is, Ossenberger, but now we know he went to Pensy, and this, I think, a wing in this building was named after him, right? So it's essential information we needed to connect the dots, so to speak. So another instance of the defining relative clause. The boy, which boy, that had created the disturbance in chapel, right? So now we know, because we can't go on with just information, the boy. We need to know what did he do, or who he is, right? And now we know the boy that had created the disturbance in chapel. I put on this hat that I'd bought in New York that morning, right? So the hat, which hat, that I had bought in New York that morning, right? It was this red hunting hat with one of those very, very long peaks. I mean, mine is not that long. I wanted to find a record store that was open on Sunday, right? A record store. Which record store? Any record store? No, a record store that was open on Sunday. So that was open on Sunday is this essential information that we need in order to, connect those dots, right? Because we know it's a Sunday and he would like to meet Phoebe, who is not a phony in his eyes, and he would like to give her this record, Little Shirley Beans. And he eventually finds a record store. They charge him $5, I think, because it was so hard to get. But we know what happens in Central Park when it's very dark. He drops this record to the ground. It breaks into 1,000 of pieces. But Phoebe takes those pieces and she says, "I'm saving them." I thought it was so cute. Holden acts on an impulse, like he says, all of a sudden I felt like leaving this place, all of a sudden I felt like having breakfast, all of a sudden I felt like going for a walk. We have this phrase which demands the present participle, so the in at the end of the verb, so often, and actually he begins this novel by saying, "I don't feel like going into it," which is an indicator that he is immature, right? Because and it pops up then later when he's talking to his former roommates, I think, Carl Lewis, and also his former English teacher, Mr. Antolini. We've got this conversation about the mature mind and the immature mind, right? The instances I've got innumerable instances of the past perfect here, obviously because it is taught in the simple past, right? And everything that happened before this past, simple past, is formulated in the past perfect. So, for example, When he goes to see Mr. Spencer, Mrs. Spencer opens the door. How have you been, Mrs. Spencer? How have you been? The way she asked me, I knew right away old Spencer told her I'd been kicked out. So 2 instances. Spencer told, Spencer had told her I'd been kicked out, I had been kicked out, right? Another pair in English are 2 verbs. To lend something and to borrow something, right? So it actually says, lend me your scissors a second, will ya? Right? Lend me, meaning that Holden gives him the scissors, right? So Holden lends him his scissors and actually borrows those scissors from Holden. What does he need the scissors for? To cut his nails. And he does it on the floor, and Holden says, do you mind cutting your nails over the table, right? So the phrase do you mind demands the present participle of the verb. Of course, the first and foremost question is obviously who is catching whom? Why in the rye and not in the wheat or the corn? And the answer comes right at the end of this novel, when he is having this nice little conversation with his little sister Phoebe, whom he loves so much. So when Phoebe says what he would like to be in life, he says that he couldn't be a scientist, he probably couldn't be a lawyer. What he'd like to become in life is the catcher in the rye. So he imagines a lot of little kids playing in this field of rye, and they don't look where they're going, and there is like this edge of the cliff, and he is standing right on the edge of the cliff. And so whenever those little kids start to go over the cliff, he has to catch them, and he would like to do it all day long. So he'd like to be the catcher in the rye, which of course has some figurative meaning to it, doesn't it? Like, because this is a coming of age novel, and Holden refuses to grow up, refuses to become more mature and to use his head, so to speak, because he's very impulsive. He would like to catch those innocent little children, to protect them, to keep them from facing this sort of cruel, brutal world which is full of phonies and perverts and people that are not to be trusted in Holden's view, obviously, right? I mean, the world is a wonderful place to live if you can adjust to the societal norms, standards and rules in a way, right? And he obviously is rebelling against those norms. Yeah, so that's why he's having a difficult time, because he refuses to comply with those expectations, societal norms and, you know, like rules. As Mr. Antolini puts it, and also Carl Lewis, his mind is immature. He needs to grow up, right? Alright guys, that's about it from me for today's video. I hope it's been helpful. I will let you be the judge, because you gotta read this novel. It contains a lot of bad language, but I've told you already, he's a rebel. He doesn't want to comply with the societal expectations, and it's just an indication what is really going on in his mind, right? I wish you luck, I wish you success, and I wish you joy. Всем пока, Tschüss zusammen, bye guys, and I'll see you in my next video.